Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Gary.
Good morning.
Morning, Chet, Bob,
Begin.
and Pat. Okay. And Carla.
Good morning, everybody. For this meeting concerning the town safety element. The meeting is going to be conducted in two ways. The first part will be conducted by Laura Russell, and she will introduce the consultants who have written the draft report. And then the Geologic Safety Committee will conduct a session dealing with the report. I thank you all for coming. I want to compliment the consultants for diligent work on their product for the town that we're going to be discussing. The meeting at this point should be open to comments from anybody who wishes to comment.
So this is oral communications for members of the public that want to speak on something that is not on the agenda. So is there anyone in the audience that wants to speak on something not on the agenda? Rita Gomez has her hand up through the chair. Can I allow Rita to speak now?
That's fine.
Okay.
Who's over here?
John Wallace.
Hi, all.
Greetings. Good morning. I just want to say I'm just so grateful that you guys are once again meeting after years of not meeting, having that the meeting was last month or the month before. But as a member of the community, I'm just so happy to see this particular committee involved once again. Thank you for being here and having a quorum so that this meeting can happen.
Well, thank you, Laura. We appreciate your comments very much. So I will turn the meeting over to you at this point if there are no public comments for your first part of the meeting.
Question, are we going to approve the minutes from the last meeting first? Or
Yeah.
At the time, the Geologic,
Dad, we need to approve the minutes.
no,
yes.
the Geologic Committee is going to be conducting the second half of the meeting, and at that time, we will take care of matters concerning the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we'll just take care of that later.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
So,
Okay, so Carla, do you have the members of your team here? We had some Zoom problems this morning, so we just wanted to make sure we're all set.
Curtis said he's joining right now. Aaron told me he didn't. I guess he didn't get his Zoom link. I just sent him mine. I don't know if that'll allow him to.
Yeah, he can also follow the link on the agenda
Okay.
and I can make him a panelist.
Okay.
Is Pat
Perfect.
here?
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
So let's just hold on a minute, everyone, and we'll just make sure that we've got our technical team here. Wanted to make sure everyone saw that John Wallace is here, the town geologist. If you don't know me, I'm Laura Russell. I'm the Planning and Building Director. And then I just wanted to make sure, because we need to reflect on the record that we have a quorum. So I just wanted to make sure, Pat, are you there? Could you just let us know?
Yes,
Okay.
signing in from Italy.
Wow, thank you.
Gary there. Where?
Thanks, Aaron, for joining. Hopefully you can change your name for me.
Okay, yeah,
Thanks.
so as introduction, we have Carla Violet from Urban Planning Partners. Urban Planning Partners is the lead consultant for the town, working on our safety element and our housing element. And then she has a team that's working with her also. So I'll turn it over to her to introduce Aaron and to walk you through a presentation. Oh, we also have joining us Curtis Banks from Urban Planning Partners.
So much, Laura. Yes, we have Aaron here from Atlas Planning Solutions. Thanks, Aaron. And then Curtis Banks as our project director for both the housing element and the safety element update. So they're both going to be available for questions. But let me dive into my presentation first. So, let me start from the beginning here. Can you all see my screen okay?
Yes.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
Carla, for me, your audio is a little bit
soft?
low. If the microphone's a little closer to your mouth, maybe.
Is that any better?
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks for letting me know. I'll try to speak up too. All right, so today we'll be covering the geologic, seismic, and flooding hazards memo that you should have all received. For our agenda, we'll be reviewing just the overall safety element update process and how input from this committee will help inform the safety element. So I'm going to walk through each of the topic areas shown here at a high level, and we'll go through some of those new policies and actions. And then we'll close with next steps and open up the meeting for questions. So recent state law now requires that municipalities update their safety element in conjunction with their housing element, and that occurs on an 8-year cycle. So as Laura mentioned, the town's updating the 6th cycle of their housing element for the years 2023 through 2031. And the safety element must address protecting the town's people from unreasonable risks associated with disasters like earthquakes, floods, fires, landslides, and other hazards identified by the local community. So to help with reviewing the draft safety element document, our team has prepared a series of 4 memos focused on different topic areas of the safety element. And each of these memos will comprise a portion of the safety element. We'll be covering the first one today. So the memo before you includes historical data, existing conditions, and some updated maps. We're also incorporating many of the existing policies from the 2010 safety element that are still relevant today. However, some new draft policies and actions are shown in that blue italicized font. And so town staff and our team are seeking early input from you all related to the geologic, seismic, and flooding hazards. And then this input will help inform edits to the draft safety element. So I'm going to start in order of the topics within the memo. So we'll start with faulting. Portola Valley is bisected by the San Andreas fault zone, and that's made up of a number of individual fault traces along which movement has occurred at some time in the past. And traces of this fault zone judged as active and with significant potential for future displacement are shown on the town's geologic map. And the municipal code includes special building setbacks along earthquake traces to minimize damage, loss of life potential resulting from future movement. And as we all know, the last major earthquake greater than 6.0 magnitude was the San Andreas Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989. So the new fault displacement hazard policies, I'm just showing them here, and I won't read them word for word, but the first high level requires new habitable structures be designed and built per the most recent California building code. We've also added a second policy requiring that qualifying subdivisions within an earthquake fault zone prepare a site-specific fault investigation. And any proposed new living space within a fault setback also should be supported by a fault investigation. And the last new policy here requires above ground crossing of utility lines where service and safety can't be assured for subsurface lines. And just to show you the 2 new maps that we prepared, the first shows regional fault areas. So you can see the Alquist Priola zone there, and a local fault areas map. And I'm happy to come back to these during the Q&A portion of the meeting to walk through more detail. So next we'll cover ground shaking. According to the most recent edition of the Uniform California Earthquake Rupture Forecast, there is a 72% chance of an earthquake of 6.7 magnitude or greater that could strike the Bay Area region between 2014 and 2044. And depending on the type of underlying rock formation, soil conditions, and amount of underground water, the ground effects will vary. I do want to point out though that any location in Portola Valley must comply with the structures must comply with current California building code. And some of the new ground shaking policies and actions that we've added to the safety element are shown here. To quickly go through those, the first requires that all essential buildings be designed and constructed to meet or exceed current California building code requirements. We've also added the policy to investigate methods to enhance current siting, design, and construction standards for new developments. Also to encourage seismic retrofits for existing homes within the town. Related to that, identify funding opportunities to assist homeowners with seismic retrofit improvements. And lastly, to periodically review and update the town's code and building code to ensure compliance with the latest state building code. So for landsliding, our next topic, the town's ground movement potential map classifies landslides by potential for future movement, and town regulations require that these maps be consulted when new development is proposed. In addition, the California Geological Survey has mapped areas with potential for earthquake-induced landslides, which may require further investigation prior to development. And again, we've created an additional map. This is the landslide susceptibility map. And as you can see, the higher landslide susceptible areas are generally along that westernmost half of town. Again, we can come back to any of these maps. That would be helpful. And some of the new policies we've drafted include requiring geologic and soil reports for all new development in areas of identified landslides or other zones of geologic hazard susceptibility, or when deemed necessary by the town geologist. This also includes continuing to file, reference, and index geologic or geotechnical mapping and data within the town's GIS. Requiring that all geotech investigations within the town be prepared by a geotech engineer or certified engineering geologist and be peer reviewed. And the last one is to restrict development projects that will cause hazardous geologic conditions or expose existing developments to an unacceptable level of risk until causative factors are mitigated. So those are just the new policies added. Next is ground settlement. So the town's geologic map identifies alluvium, slope wash, and landslide deposits as areas with the highest potential for ground settlement. But some areas with other geologic units may also be subject to that. So detailed site investigations are required to determine local settlement potential. So we've added one new policy and two actions here. The first is to address areas of potential settlement within the town as part of the development process. And that would include, again, regularly updating the town's geologic map that identifies geologic deposits prone to ground settlement, and to require geologic investigations for sites identified with or suspected to contain settlement-prone geologic units. Okay, for soil liquefaction, there's a high probability of soil liquefaction in Portola Valley along the valley floor, where it's underlain by alluvium and seasonally high water table. And the California Geologic survey shows these potential areas and again requires they be investigated prior to development. And we prepared a map here with the geologic survey information. So you can see the potential areas in that purple color. And again, one new policy and action is proposed. And the first is to require liquefaction assessment studies for all development projects proposed in the areas shown in that purple to ensure compliance with current state code, and require that all new developments must prepare and comply with a design level geotech investigation report. Okay, flooding is next. Portola Valley has both a 1% or 100-year flood, as it's called, and a 0.2% or 500-year flood annual chance flood zones as defined by FEMA. So buildings and other structures in the 100-year floodplain must meet certain requirements to receive a floodplain development permit and qualify for NFIP insurance and federally backed mortgages. So Portola Valley has experienced minor flooding, including portions of Corte Madera, Saucil and Los Troncos Creek natural floodplains, and locations with inadequate or obstructed drainage facilities. And there are also some portions of Portola Valley exposed to potential flooding from seismically induced failure of small dams. So the Brondo Lake in Palo Alto Foothills Park and the small reservoir behind the Sequoias and the Moore's Head Lake are both retained by earthen embankments. So if either dam were to fail during an earthquake, some downstream flooding may be expected. But at this time, no data is really available to assess accurately the seismic stability of the dams or the potential flood hazard. But we are required to disclose that in this document. So this new map shows the 100-year flood zone in dark blue, the 500-year flood zone in a lighter blue color, the Felt Lake Dam inundation zone in a dark green, and then the Searsville Dam inundation zone in a lighter green color. So we have several new policies and actions proposed for flooding. But first is to minimize injury, loss of life, property damage, and economic and social disruption caused by flooding and inundation hazards. The second is to regulate development in drainages, especially in designated 100-year flood zones. And two of the actions under that new policy are to require all development along Los Troncos Creek, Corte Madera Creek, and Salsa Creeks comply with the town's creek setback ordinance, to investigate and identify potential funding sources to assist property owners in flood hazard retrofits where feasible. The next policy is to continue participating in the NFIP and encourage all owners of properties located within the 100-year floodplain zones to purchase and keep flood insurance for those properties. And the last is to require all essential and critical facilities in or within 200 feet of the 100-year or 500-year flood zones to develop disaster response and evacuation plans in the event of a flooding. Just a couple more here. For erosion and sedimentation, there were soil maps prepared by the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and they provide a general view of principal soil associations in Portola Valley and relative erodibility of soil groups. And these maps show high erosion hazard on the steep slopes west of the valley floor and a moderate hazard to foothill areas to the east. So throughout much of Portola Valley, the combination of natural slopes, soil structure, and native vegetation contribute to a relatively slow natural erosion rate, but where natural conditions are disturbed by grading and site development, or even poorly controlled animal keeping, erosion can accelerate and cause damage to both the site and downstream where sedimentation of eroded material takes place. So we've proposed 2 new policies shown here. The first is to enforce hillside protection measures that control runoff and erosion. And the second is to require drought-resistant vegetation with deep root systems where appropriate in new developments and major remodels to help reduce over-irrigation in areas of the town prone to slope instability. Okay, for expansive soils and soil creep, the town's ground movement potential map shows areas of where expansive soil occurs most frequently, and individual site investigations and laboratory testing are required to identify expansive soil conditions. And we propose 1 new policy here that subdivisions, structures, or other developments must prepare and comply with the design level geotech investigation report. And just to kind of end here with next steps, I want to make sure you're all aware that we have a couple more meetings next week with the Emergency Preparedness Committee to review the wildfire hazards memo and Senate Bill 99 analysis. We'll also be reviewing the climate change adaptation and resilience memo with the Sustainability Committee. We anticipate 1 or 2 joint committee meetings to review comments on the full draft of the safety element next month. Then there will be a planning commission meeting after that to review the draft safety element. It will then need to go to the State Board of Forestry and Fire Protection for review. And towards the end of the process, the draft safety element will go to Town Council for review and approval. And I think we can open it up for questions now. I appreciate everyone's patience during a somewhat lengthy presentation, but I hope it was helpful. And I'm happy to go back to any of the slides.
So what I would recommend is if you have questions on the presentation materials or the memo, now would be a good time to ask questions. And then we should see if there's any members of the public that want to give public comments. And then we should come back to committee discussion, where you give feedback and your kind of thoughts about what has been drafted so far. If some things are missing, if you have additional ideas, so that would come after the public comment. So that would be our recommendation.
Okay. So are we ready to begin with the Geologic Safety Committee part of the meeting?
No.
Public
No.
questions.
No.
All right, I'm sorry. I didn't hear any comments.
Nan,
Question?
Ma'am?
Okay. This is a really interesting document. It seems part aspirational and part designed to enforce policies. And I'm never quite sure where the dividing line is. And there are some ideas in it that are really good, really helpful, but they lack any link to enforcement or administration. It's sort of, well, we should do this, we should do that. And there are other places where it's very specific, and then it's clear that we have town policies that carry those ideas out. So how does one distinguish between the two? And what is, I mean, as I read through the document and made comments, I kept saying, well, okay, this is fine, but who's going to administer this, or who's going to enforce this? Is this a document designed for the town council to figure out how to implement the policies and the safety element?
So that's a good question. Let me start with the big picture. Okay, in the big picture, this is a chapter, an element of the general plan.
Yeah.
So it should be aspirational. It should be forward-looking. It should be the big picture policy document. Then general plan elements can have some specifics in them, but they are more often implemented through other regulations, other municipal code regulations or other policies. So sometimes when we adopt a general plan element such as this, we have to go back into our policies then and update the code and our procedures to achieve that. So what we would be doing is we'd go back into our own code and we'd discuss these implementation aspects with John as the town geologist and talk about if we need to make any changes to any of our procedures or any of our other policies to fit with these aspirational aspects of the safety element.
Okay, thank you. And then what if the, what we're calling the aspirational parts of the safety element are not carried out? They're not followed through with, what happens in that case? They're just left sort of hanging as a suggestion.
So it depends on the types of suggestions. Okay, so let me talk first about if there's a development project. So some of these things are related to how development projects would go forward. So a private property owner wants to build something on their property. And then in order for it to be approved, it needs to be consistent with the general plan. Now, the general plan language is going to, it's, as we discussed, it's aspirational, right? It can sometimes be general, but the project still should be in compliance with the general plan. And the interpretation of whether it's in compliance is going to be made by whoever the decision-making body is for that project, with feedback from the subject matter experts. So I'll give you an example. There's a development project with a subdivision, and there's certain parts of the safety element that they have to comply with. And then John would give recommendations in his peer review of their project and their report. And then the approval making body, let's say it's the planning commission, would ultimately say, we think this is, you know, in compliance with the general plan. This meets the town's policies based on what the applicant has prepared and the peer review by the town geologist. So that if that's where there's a private development project. If some of these things might be more related to the town's actions, right? When it's related to the town's actions, then we try to create an implementation strategy. So when you update a general plan element, you think about how we're going to implement that over time. And so there might be implementation measures that would be appropriate for this committee to discuss, for example, and help the town overall to implement, to make recommendations on for implementation. And then there's some that are going to be kind of just technical, right? That lead us to the technical staff that we have to be able to update those. Does that help to answer the question, Nan?
It does. Thank you very much, Laura. Yeah.
I have a couple questions as well. These are more specific. So has there been no change to California's building code since 2010?
Actually, 2019, I believe, is now the latest and greatest.
So that's incorporated into your recommended update.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the building code is generally updated every 3 years on a 3-year cycle. And so the language would be, you know, the most recent update to the code is what the language really should be.
Okay. And so there's a lot of discussion about when new structures are built. Is there any requirement for structures being renovated? Do they have to adhere to any of these or some sort of similar restrictions?
I do believe there's a couple policies that require larger remodels to satisfy certain actions. But I know many of the policies do pertain to newer development.
And this is an appropriate place for the committee to provide feedback. So there are other town policies that apply to major additions and remodels, particularly related to fire safety. So if this committee felt like these policies should apply more broadly, then we could study that and see if there was a way to apply them to more projects. But we would be looking to the committee to see if you had feedback on those types of things. We
Okay,
also have to be, we have to create a reasonable threshold that is, we can implement. But it's certainly something we could look into if the committee wanted us to.
okay. And then the final question. So do you know, does the state plan to update kind of its flood guidelines based on the fact that storms are becoming more intense and being more kind of closely coming through in a more restricted time slot? Is that something that the climate resiliency group would overlap perhaps with the geologic group?
A lot of sense actually to overlap those two. Erin, I'm not sure if you're aware of any upcoming guidance on that front, but
so hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So most of the guidance is really relying on FEMA and a lot of the updated mapping that they've been doing over the last 20 years to really modernize the flood insurance rate maps and the risk mapping program. In addition to that, the Department of Water Resources through the state of California has provided additional guidance, but a majority of that has really focused on the Central Valley flood protection plan and the 200-year floodplain mapping that has occurred in that portion of the state. It really hasn't migrated out beyond there. And so for us, professionals and practitioners that are updating safety elements, what we're trying to do is at least provide some additional protection, looking at regulating to a higher standard where it's possible, but it's really dependent on the unique conditions of the jurisdiction and the concerns that you may have, as well as past effects and past flood incidents and where those have occurred.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Are there any additional questions from the committee for the staff or consultants? Okay, then through the chair, I would recommend we take public comments now. So I can run this on Zoom if that's okay with you and call on the members of the public that wish to speak. Is that okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. The first public comment is from Rita Gomez.
Hi, thank you for taking my comments. And I'm unable to fully hear Carla when she's speaking. There's a little bit of an echo. It's very dim and it's an echo. I'm not sure how that will record. And can someone tell me how many? Oh, 6 attendees. Thank you, Laura, letting me know that. I just wanted to comment on a few things. On page 3 of the packet, when it's talking about facilities and critical transportation links and whatnot that should be secure. We have such an infrastructure problem in this town when it comes to electrical and telephones. Every time we have a significant rain, my 2 landlines in my home are down in December. They were down for over 40 days. And then still needed to be fixed. And then recently was down again. And electrical, we've had town meetings where, all the town lost electrical and Wi-Fi. So I don't know if that's considered critical structures, but for safety, since we have a lot of people in our town that are of a particular age and not necessarily if they have no cell phone, the landline is their line to safety. And there's things that are involved in making that happen. As far as flooding, I mean, on Westridge and Alpine Road, every time it rains, that telephone box floods. And a few years ago, all of Alpine Trail was flooded, almost to Alpine to the very street. And there were trees down in that creek, and it did come over, and there were the fences over there. I didn't see any mention of that area, and I know that the town is looking at some of those areas for potential building of future sites. And Carla mentioned that the flood insurance would be required, but I see in the document that it said that it would be, I think, encouraged or something. But what would be the town's liability if those people or the buildings, if we use that area for affordable housing and it's owned by institution, what's the likelihood that all of those people would be able to pay for, you know, the high level, like we have problems with earthquake insurance and even just home insurance because of the high fire risk, and many people are being canceled. So I'm not sure how that will work for our town for it to be highly suggested or required. And under the natural conditions where it's talking about erosion and saying that, okay, if I guess if trees are removed, and that will change the nature of runoff or whatever, that it will change. But long-rooted drought-resistant planting will happen, as we know that we are in a critical drought situation where even drought-resistant plants aren't growing right now unless you use water. And then if you use water in this town, I know for myself, I am paying double the amount for certain levels of water. So I'm not sure if I would then go out to water drought resistance plants if I can reach them on the back slope of my property. So that seems to be hard. You know, I've had trees die, and I've had to put in a note to the town because I would have to replace those trees because they are along Westridge to hide my house, but asking for permission to wait until the drought is over so that I can plant those trees and be a responsible water person, and also be responsible, not just abusing the trees. In reviewing different structures that are going to be built in the future, it talks about all of these different agencies that will be reviewing. This group, I am so happy that this particular group, the Geosafety Committee of Portola Valley, has been meeting. This is their second meeting, and it's long overdue, as you know, my personal feelings on it. But these are residents in Portola Valley that see these things. And yes, the residents of Portola Valley can pay highly qualified consultants, but this group here, you know, the town has a lot of respect for them. And I would really strongly suggest that this group be one of the reviewing factors and have a large say on, you know, approvals, geo approvals for anything that's done for the safety committee concerning geological and anything else that's on this particular folder. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Next, we have Karen.
Hi, my comments are unfortunately not really related to geology, but other things that have come up. Kind of the first easy question is, I'm not sure where the safety element deals with what Rita discussed about trees falling along the power lines. That's really increased in the last few years. We have a lot more power outages than we used to, and they all seem to be about old trees falling on power lines. So that sort of is a kind of a don't answer question. And then my other question was something that Carla brought up, and I've been confused about in terms of the wildfire section of this. Unfortunately, due to various very unfortunate circumstances, the Wildfire Committee is basically non-existent, and we've had 8 people in the last 7 months leave, including myself. And when I looked on the town calendar, it sort of vaguely put that It might be a discussion by the Wildfire Committee at 7 p.m. Next Tuesday, but now it's sort of been added to the emergency prep, and those people are not completely qualified to do that. Or not that they're not qualified, but that's not really their charter. So I would like some clarification on that, and when that would be, and to make sure that, because that is really the area that we're developing the most in town and having a good representation from the public. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and answer that if that's okay with the chair. The Wildfire Preparedness Committee does not have enough members at this time to have a quorum, so they cannot meet. So the Emergency Preparedness Committee is going to be reviewing the materials, as Karen mentioned, related to wildfire and evacuation. So that meeting is scheduled and that's coming up. In terms of the trees falling along the power lines and more outages, I think that's an interesting and good point that speaks to our local conditions there. So we can bring that into our thinking if there's anything that we can address through that. We have two more attendees that have their hand up. So the next person is Bob Turcott.
Hi, thank you. And thank you again to the committee for resuming your important work. I and many others are thrilled that the committee's become active again. I have three questions. The first one to Carla. You showed a number of new policies, and I was wondering, do these policies replace existing policies, or are there existing policies that are being deleted?
For the most part, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can hear you.
These are new policies. They're the ones that we've modified slightly are not shown in blue. They're still shown in black font. So the blue indicates brand new policies.
Okay, so they're additive.
Yeah.
Okay, and then question to committee members, and I apologize if this was covered at the last meeting, which I couldn't attend, but on page 9 of the agenda packet, they show a map of fault traces within the town, and the Hermit Fault is shown to stop before approaching the Wedge property and not crossing Alpine Road. In the previous version of the general plan, the Hermit Fault was shown to cross Alpine, and as you know, that's a major evacuation route. And so one question to the committee is, what was the evidence by which the decision was made to remove that portion of the fault from the map, and was it done in a public setting? I understood that such modifications need to be reviewed by the Planning Commission, but I was unable to find an agenda where that happened. I was wondering if people could provide some background on that and point me to where I could learn more about that decision. And then the last question is, I understand that there's data actually based on LIDAR that is consistent with thrust fault activity in the region where that Hermit Fault trace had been removed. And so I was wondering if anyone could let me know about the latest thinking on that and the latest work that's being done with that. Thanks.
Well, if I may start out, Bob. Okay, someone should correct me, but because I wasn't on the committee in 2017, but my understanding is that the changes to the map between, I think, 2010 and 2017 were the changes that were discussed by the committee were those that pertain to the San Andreas Fault itself. And I found no discussion of, say, the Hermit Fault or any other fault being changed between 2010 and 2017. So, John Wallace, could you add something here?
Yeah, I'll address that. And thanks for your comment, Bob. So the issue with the fault that runs through West Ridge and head south across the Stanford Wedge property. That was presented to the Geologic Safety Committee back in 2017 or 18, I believe. And where it went from there, I think Ted Sayre was handling that project for our office at that time. But he and I reviewed 30 years of fault trenching investigations through that area, through Ash Lane, West Ridge, and in all those areas. And none of the project work that was done found any evidence for that fault. And so every time there was an investigation that addressed that, where the fault trace was, we as the town geologist had to figure out what to do with that trace that ran through someone's property, and now it's positively found not to be on that property, but then it extends through the adjacent property. So we were juggling that trace for 30 some odd years without any positive evidence of it. And so eventually it got to the point where we ran out of room. We couldn't extend it through anyone else's property that likely it could have gone through. So we eliminated it from that part of the town. And fast forward to today, there's recent investigations that have been ongoing at the Stanford Wedge property with more fault trenching there. And that fault trenching positively found no evidence where that fault used to go. And so we also, as part of that project, did an investigation where we cleared the West Ridge cut slope, where it was also shown on the town map, and positively showed that the fault did not cross the West Ridge cut slope where it had been previously mapped. So there's plenty of evidence to suggest that it's not there. And with regard to the LiDAR, we were using the most recent LiDAR images of that area, and there is absolutely no LiDAR evidence of that trace. There was formerly, and we think the original map trace was shown based upon an inflection in that Stanford Wedge property where there's a topographic break and slope. And the LiDAR reflects that. And we think that's where it was originally and why it was originally mapped there. Well, we trenched as part of, we being the Stanford group and me being the reviewer, we trenched right across that little break and slope and found it was a depositional, a stream terrace break and slope, and had nothing to do with faulting. So all the evidence we have now, which is even stronger than it was in 2017 when we pulled it off the map, it's even stronger evidence now that that fault trace does not extend south, at least south of Ash Lane and West Ridge area.
There'll be more comments about this particular topic in the Geologic Safety Committee part of the meeting.
Okay, the next public comment is from Christy Corley.
Thank you. I'm wondering if this meeting is recorded. I find it interesting, and many others will find it interesting to learn about geology. I'm seeing red. Is it being recorded?
It is, yes.
Thank you. How can residents get a list of the landslide areas previously in town? For example, there was one on February 2nd, 1998 on Minoka. So I only know of that site, 405 Minoka, but I'm sure there's others, and I find it hard to find. Is there a way to put together a list so we know where the landslide areas of the past are? I know there used to be one up in Woodside Highlands. I see a house built on it now. I think that's of interest to people buying houses as well as possibly buying houses around locations, and how things, you know, I'm not a geologist, so I just think it's important in buying houses. I also am concerned about when you're doing brand new policies, that those policies, if they are updated, are explained to the residents, and they then go in the digest of the town council. And if it relates to geology, into the geology minutes. That would be another request. And then, let's see. I have a few other things. I'm concerned about tree roots hold soil in place, reducing erosion. In these ways, trees lessen the force of storms and reduce the amount of runoff into sewers, streams, and rivers, improving the water quality. 100 mature trees can intercept about 100,000 gallons of rainfall per year. And another thing I am reading, trees are recognized for their importance of managing runoff. Their leaf canopies can reduce erosion caused by the falling rain. They also provide surface area where rainwater lands and evaporates. Roots take up water and help create conditions in the soil that promote infiltration. The loss or removal of slope vegetation can result in either increased rates of erosion or higher frequencies of slope failure. So these things concern me when we're thinking about building, and I just wanted to bring them up for all to listen. And as we go forward with building, I think we need to be careful. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak? Please raise your hand in Zoom.
Hey, Laura, I don't know if we needed to respond to Christy about her first comment, but I can certainly weigh in. There were 3 landslides on Minoka Road in 1998, but your question is a good one on how does the public gain access to that knowledge. We as the town geologist have databases for all of that, and it's probably the best place to start is to give us a call, and because we have 40 years of history in the town. But anyway, that's just a quick comment on that first comment.
I think this is an interesting point. Are any of the consultant professionals familiar with any sort of list that communities keep that the public would have access to for past landslides?
I'm familiar with the Department of Conservation's mapping, but I don't know how far back it goes. And I think it relies on data from public agencies or municipalities. So it's something.
Okay, so then I would say this, this would be, since the public has brought it up and it's, within the committee's purview. If the committee thinks that this is something that would be important for the community to have access to, then if you wanted to give us that feedback, then we could further think about how we could provide access to that information to the public. So I leave that with the committee if you think that's an important thing for us to be looking into.
If I may comment, that was one of my questions, and that is, how can well, it has two parts. First part has to do with investigations that have been done in town and the results of the investigation and changes to maps. How can the public have access to the reports behind any changes to the reports that have been done? I mean, if I would like to be able to have access to reports that have been, to studies that have been done on, say, properties adjoining mine. And it's not clear to me how one would access those other than through a Public Records Act request, which is pretty awkward. So I would suggest having, as much as possible, the trenching studies, landslide studies, any of the geotechnical studies that have been done in town be accessible, readily accessible to the public. I think that would be tremendously helpful. And the other question I have, which is sort of related, is for the maps that we're showing in the safety element, it's not clear to me what the sources are. I'd like to see the citations. And the maps are so small on the PDF pages, and if you enlarge them, you lose the detail. It's an artifact of PDF. If those could be also accessible to the public, maybe on the town's website or Cotton Shire's website, I'm not sure who's keeping those maps. That would be really helpful.
Okay, so thank you, Nan. We've sort of transitioned into the next part of the meeting, and that is for the committee members yourselves to give us, the staff and consultant team, feedback on what we've presented to you. So very much like the kinds of comments that Nan has just given. So things that you think may be missing, recommendations for improvements, any additional policies that you think should be considered, any of that kind of feedback. So that's what we're really looking for from the committee today.
So are we ready for the Geologic Safety Committee?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Put it on. I am Chet Ruckey, a current chair of the Geologic Safety Committee. And before we get into old business and new business, I want to recognize the members of the committee who are here. First with the ladies, Nan Shustak, who has already commented several times this morning. She's a former lecturer on geology at San Jose State. Pat McGorry, I'm not sure where you are. There you are. She's on vacation in Europe, so it's probably in the evening now where she is. She's a geologist, has been a geologist for the Geological Survey in Menlo Park, and is now emeritus in that position. Gary Ernst, are you here, Gary? Gary is an emeritus professor of geology at Stanford. He's well known in the field, and we are pleased to have him here to help us in various ways. By the way, I forgot to mention that Pat is the secretary for the Geologic Safety Committee. I introduce here my son, Bob Ruckey. He's not a member of the committee. He is, however, a computer consultant, and the committee does access his abilities. So I think we should begin with a few comments that we have on the safety element. To begin with, on matters of faulting, I wish to comment about the literature that is referred to by the committee. We think that the 1908 report of the Lawson report should be mentioned. That's the most thorough report on what happened in 1906. there's reference to mapping done by Dickinson in 1970 and 71. That work is now mostly obsolete and is not very helpful anymore in our estimation. There is a report that I wrote with Bob and with the former town geologist, Ted Sayer, on the San Andreas Fault. And I encourage that this be referred to and thought about. The changes that we came up with were accepted by the town in a resolution, I think in 2017. It's worth noting that geologic faulting is not something that can easily be predicted. And I think that's worth mentioning. And Gary, I would appreciate your commenting on this topic because I know you are quite concerned about it.
Well, of course, the problem is that many of the faults are active on a long-term basis, but you cannot easily predict when an earthquake is going, a fault is going to become reactivated. That is a big problem the USGS has tried to work on for many years, determining probabilities. Parkfield is a good example. Out in the Carrizo Plain, there were earthquakes there, as indicated by trenching, occurring about every 20 to 25 years for over 100 years. And the last fault rupture at Parkfield was in 1966. I was happy to teach summer field camp for UCLA in San Luis Obispo, and we rushed over and looked at the offset highways and that sort of thing. The survey recognized that there was a periodicity to the faulting there, and they instrumented the hell out of the area. They had all sorts of remote sensing going on, drilling one thing and another. And then they expected another earthquake by about 1990. It came and went. In 1995, 2000, I don't know, I think it was 2011 or something before it ruptured again. My point is that these are very complicated phenomena, and these are the ones we know about. Many faults that have ruptured recently in the LA area, for instance, were on unknown faults. But they were faults. We just hadn't seen them. So there's a very difficult thing. When we discuss faulting, we are looking at things that are so complicated, it is still very difficult for people who work on predicting earthquake probabilities. 72% through 2044, that's the latest prediction. Well, if it doesn't happen, well, they say it was only 72%. If it does happen, well, there you go. So it is something we would like to know, because if we are going to put developments in areas that are seismically active, and we know the zones that are mostly active, but we don't know the details, and we certainly can't predict when. All we can do is, as they said in LA, every day brings the earthquake fault closer to us. Every day it happens. It will eventually it will happen, but which day it will happen, we don't know. So there is that problem about earthquakes, and the same problem with landslides and many other phenomena, which are complexly related to Mother Nature. It's a really complicated beast. It's not just something simple. We can look at one fault and determine what's going to happen.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. I'm going to call on you later about landsliding, because you've had great experience dealing with landslides in Southern California that are, I think, appropriate for us to consider here. Bob. The Geologic Safety Committee was told by the town geologist that it should not conduct a study of the Stanford Wedge area, and so it has not. However, members of the community, geologic members, are perfectly free to study that area if they want. And I am one of them who did, along with son Bob here. And we have an extensive paper that is written and has been presented to the town. We don't know what the town will do with it, if anything, but at least it is available. And
Or it will be shortly.
we hope so. Any other comments about faulting that any of you would like to bring up?
Well, that study identifies the so-called hermit fault as a real, something that has broken the surface, right?
Yes, it has. So I hope that our paper will be considered by the town. We feel very concerned that LiDAR evidence clearly, without doubt, indicates that the Stanford Fault Wedge area is crossed by an active fault. And we have quite a bit of evidence in the paper dealing with the details of our investigation. Concerning earthquakes, my son Bob here has been very concerned about co-seismic activity, and I'd like him to talk about that briefly.
Yeah, I have, not a member, but I guess is of the committee, but thank you for asking me to speak. It seems that a lot of the literature as far as earthquake hazards in the town focus on the San Andreas Fault, which is an obvious, very big seismic hazard. But there are other parts of the town that are underrepresented in terms of the degree of earthquake potential. And part of that also is co-seismic things. And for people who don't know what that means, if you have a big earthquake in one place, you can have surface rupture somewhere else. That happened in the Loma Prieta earthquake. There was a lot of surface rupture in parts of Santa Clara County and along the foothills of the Santa Cruz Mountains. There was even damage to bridges on 280 close to Portola Valley. But within the town, I'm not aware of this Loma Prieta earthquake actually causing something inside the town, but it does show the potential that if there was another earthquake were to happen like the Loma Prieta that happened to be closer to the town, or for example, if the Hayward Fault were to erupt, there could be other things. And so I think the recognition that co-seismic faults is important. I have one observation I'd like to make, which is I did not know what the because Dad is the chairman, I know a little bit about what goes on with the committee. I had a heads up that this meeting was going to come up. We were able to get the documentation for this meeting a few days ago and only had a little bit of time to study it. I didn't really know what was going to be there until we got the document. When I, as a sort of an outsider looking at this, I saw that it has these names like the safety element, and here's the Geologic Safety Committee. I don't really see anything in the document about earthquake preparedness by the town. For example, does the town even have an earthquake preparedness plan? Why isn't the Geologic Safety Committee been integrated with that? When earthquakes happen, other things can be important. For example, if a big earthquake happens, especially in the dry season, it's possible for more than one residence to suddenly have a fire because of something shaking in their residence. It gets on fire. Water can be suddenly not available. The fire department's overstretched. Suddenly we have a potential scenario for a conflagration in which we then have to deal with evacuation. If the earthquake happens during a wet season, we could have lots of landslides. I am very curious to find out later, maybe it's the appropriate time, not now, but what plans does the town have to provide facilities for evacuation? I mean, there are places that like Ford Field, what will the town be providing the residents in response to something like a major regional earthquake where all of our neighbors will be overtaxed and we will mostly have to be taking care of ourselves? What can the residents expect from the town? I don't see that kind of information in this document. Maybe it's not the purpose of the document.
No.
I accept that, but if there is another document that does have it, that would be great. And it would be nice if the committee could have a copy of it. Thank you for your time.
Bob, there's actually a tremendous body of work by the town, by the Woodside Fire District, by the San Mateo County Department of Emergency Management, CAL FIRE, FEMA. I mean, we spend a lot of time talking about emergency planning. The purpose of this document we're talking about today is the general plan. It's a very high level policy document. You're talking about, I mean, what you're asking is a good question, but it's well beyond the scope of this particular meeting.
Okay. Well, I thought it would be, but I needed to at least raise the issue because there was this confusion as to why something that was going to be the safety element doesn't have something that seems like an important part of a safety element.
Well, those are important things, but that's not the purpose of a safety element. It's one piece of a very large policy puzzle, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay.
The people of the town need to be aware that something that Bob just mentioned, that if there is a serious event, seismic event or any other event, the town's facilities may be so taxed that we as individuals, homeowners, will be on our own. We have to protect ourselves the best we can. And the town has had a civilian emergency preparedness program. We haven't even heard much about that in recent times. But we need probably to hear about that further.
We have an emergency preparedness committee. We also have WPV Ready, the former CERT from the Woodside Fire. I mean, again, this is a bit beyond the scope of this committee's, this meeting, certainly this agenda, but there's a lot of resources out there and we are constantly trying to make people more aware of the resources to help them prepare for emergencies. So thank you.
Yeah, if I may, I had some of the same concerns as Bob, but and I understand that these are perhaps implementation details, many of which have been taken care of, but I would like to see in this document some sort of linkage between the geologic section and the emergency preparedness section. I don't really see any place. It's as if they're two completely separate parts of the safety element, but they're not really. They're very closely related in reality, but I don't see in the document that there may be, I think there's maybe one paragraph that mentions emergency preparedness, but I'd like to see a little closer link between the geology section and emergency preparedness.
In addition to what Nan just mentioned, the West Napa earthquake in 2014, it was only a moment magnitude 6, and there were 6 major fires that broke out due to that earthquake. So the Geologic Safety Committee also needs to be linked with the Wildfire Safety Committee, I think explicitly.
Okay. Back to geology for a bit. Landslides definitely need to be considered carefully. And again, Gary has been a resident in Southern California where landslide problems have been severe. And I'd like to have him comment a little bit about that.
Well, we lived for 30 years in Pacific Palisades, which has cliff erosion and land slumping that was very common. I live here at the edge of an old landslide, at least as mapped by Bill Dickinson. So I am very careful to look for ripples in the roadway and things that artificially provide new markers of that indicate the beginning of slumpage. But the problem is any hilly area is going to have the possibility of land slumpage when especially the soils and unconsolidated materials are wetted by the spring rains. They lose cohesion and so they can slump down. This is the problem we all have and it must be addressed. But I'm no specialist in this. I look at hard rocks. That's what I'm concerned about. And I'm trying to avoid landslides when I'm working geologically. But what I would like to say here is it seems to me that what Nan has said and Pat, exactly right. We need to link the wildfire problems, emergency preparedness, and the geology. This is what this report is done is provide the basis, the geologic framework, including the natures of the various problems, the potential disasters. And we need to then link it more to the other agencies because it's only by a combined work that we can solve these problems. They are disciplinary. They're across several disciplines that you have to look at all at once to solve them. So you can't solve any of the problems just by looking at the geology or wildfire or whatever. So I think this is a good start, this base. But now we know where the various hazards are, geologically speaking. How do we deal with them? That's a second order problem, but an even more important problem. That's why we do this work. So it seems to me we're on the right track. We're getting ahead of this, but we know that what you guys have been talking about is exactly the problem. We need to link it to wildfire hazards and emergency preparedness.
I note that landslide problems exist in the wedge area that is of concern to the town right now. And I know that the environmental protection, the environmental report notes that there is a real problem there. It's something that definitely needs to be considered in great detail, I think, especially if any cuts were made in the area where the landslide material would come from.
Yeah, definitely.
Through the chair, I just want to remind the committee that it's important to stay on the topic of the safety element that we've provided, the information related to the safety element update.
Nan, do you have any further comments regarding your expertise in sedimentology?
Yeah, I think I will save those for my comment on the DEIR rather than right now, because I'm working on a comment and haven't finished it yet. But yes, it looks to me as if there is indication of ground disturbance at the wedge. So
again,
we're not talking about the wedge.
Yeah,
we have to talk about the safety element. We legally cannot be talking about things that are not on the agenda.
Okay, then I'd like to comment that let me see a couple of other comments. In the safety element, I'd like to see a policy for regularly updating the maps, and to keep them basically in sync with California Geological Survey, US Geological Survey maps. And strangely, some of the narrative and some of the facts presented in the safety element aren't quite in agreement with San Mateo County's this multi-jurisdictional local hazard plan that came out last fall. Some of the faults are not in the county hazard plan, are not mentioned in the safety element, and the safety element mentions for instance, the Hayward Fault, which is as a major source of seismic hazard in Portola Valley, Hayward Fault rupture, and that's not considered a major source of seismic hazard in the county's plan. So I don't want to get into the weeds here, but I'd just like to see the safety element coordinated with the updated regularly and coordinated with the best information we have from other sources, county, state, federal.
One very minor point about the safety element report is that it certainly could use a table of contents.
So I have two comments, Chet.
All right.
One, the town geologist, John, kind of walked us through the lack of evidence for the Hermit Fault. It would be great if the Geologic Safety Committee had access to look at some of that information to better understand why that fault was removed from the town map. That's one thing. And then the other is, we covered this earlier in the meeting, but was seeing that many previous recommendations were never implemented by the town. It does seem like there's a gap. There was a flood report in 1970 that looks like its recommendations were never implemented. And then there was some discussion about drainage systems that clog up in the flooding and collect debris and sediment that I didn't see any kind of discussion on getting those concerns addressed. I realize that maybe doesn't fit within this safety element draft update, but it would be helpful to get some clarification. And I know Laura walked us through a little bit of this, but is the ball getting dropped, or the town just puts resources other places? But it does seem like, in particular, the flooding issue is one that's persistent and compounded by rain events that just kind of knock out the PG&E boxes, both at the bottom of Westridge and also the bottom of Golden Oak. So anyway, those are my two thoughts, kind of more general thoughts, reviewing the draft update.
The fact that, go ahead, Nan.
Oh, okay, if I may. Yeah, there was another thought along these lines that I had as I reviewed the safety element, that concerns infrastructure. Above ground infrastructure, electric lines, whatever, can be repaired fairly quickly, but lines below ground, water, sewer, anything else that's underground, it is much more difficult to repair. And there are places where our infrastructure crosses faults, clearly. Alpine Road, Portola Road. And I would like to see some provision made, probably starting with the safety element, for restoration of service at known fault crossings. I'll give an example. At where the Hayward Fault crosses one of the legs of the California Aqueduct in Fremont, Mission Boulevard and Interstate 680. There are now valves. They know exactly where the fault is. There are valves on each side of the fault and connectors to bring across something like a dozen large hoses so they can get water across the fault very quickly after the rupture. The Hayward will probably go before the San Andreas. So they're really concerned about that. So to instead of after a major fault here, instead of having the town sitting without water, except water that's brought in by truck, and perhaps electricity, whatever else is undergrounded, I think we can I think the safety element can start the suggestion that we should provide means of bridging faults for infrastructure.
The safety element can acknowledge that some work has been done in this point that Nan just raised. The water lines that come from a big pipe on the property in western part of Portola Valley is on the ranch, that is. The water lines cross the San Andreas Fault there, and some efforts have been made to take care of allowing water to flow even if there is an offset at that spot. This sort of thing should be taken care of at other places in the town, as Nan mentioned. Are there further?
The safety element in item P4 on red page 10 does in fact address several of these items: equip water, gas, and electric lines that cross active fault traces with shutoff devices and flexibility. I mean, I will say again that this is a high level document for things that we're looking for at policy levels. What you're talking about are operational things that frankly are handled by our partners like Cal Water Service, PG&E, and the phone companies. I mean, we encourage them to do these things, but this document is not telling them how to do it.
No, it just, it points out an awareness that's needed. Are there further comments?
Yeah.
Just one final one. I wanted to echo what Gary said earlier. There's a statement early on in the draft that starts experience in California and other parts of the world that future fault movements are most likely occur on traces of most recent displacements. That's not a hard, fast rule. That's only a general observation. People need to recognize that earthquake science is relatively new. We don't really have instrumental records for entire earthquake cycles. So we need to be cautious about assuming if we address the San Andreas Fault proper as it crosses through Portola Valley that we've solved kind of the fault hazard issue, because there's many earthquakes that have occurred on faults where the faults were unknown, they were buried, they weren't accessible by trenching, but nonetheless, excuse me, we had earthquakes on those faults and they were quite damaging. So just a caution not to be too facile, sorry, on not addressing some of the other potential fault hazards.
I have a question. Maybe this is out of turn because I'm not a member of the committee, but I have an issue that I think the guest consultants would like to hear. This part of the meeting is supposed to be about the comments. There are lots of comments that I'm aware of that are written, and I don't think this is the time to like read the comments out. And I think that maybe you guys would be faster for everybody who's doing the hard work of preparing the documents. If you can get a copy, if written things can be given to the consultants and then there needs to be a way for these comments to be made public. So thank you.
All right.
I'm sorry, are you talking about, we do have a comment page for safety element comments.
Well, like you are asking for the Geologic Safety Committee to provide comments for this document. I know there are things that weren't necessarily prepared to talk about. I mean, we didn't, and I didn't know if this was going to be an all-day meeting or what, but if some things could be just given as written documents, then I think that would be faster for everybody. Shorten this meeting and also let the people who are going to look at it evaluate it. It'd be nice to understand what the reaction is to some of those comments. And so it seems like a procedural matter that if we could, is it possible to somehow get comments, written comments to the appropriate people, and can these comments be made public somehow since they're written?
Sure, we can make comments public. We typically make comments public, but we need to differentiate between two different things, right? This is an official committee meeting.
Right.
And so it's subject to all the rules of a committee meeting. So we're receiving your feedback here in the committee meeting on behalf of the committee. If you want to make comments on the safety element, then you can do it as individuals. Or you would need to have an official meeting where you discuss it and talk about your comments on behalf of the committee.
Thank you.
Is that,
Yeah, for instance, Laura, as I went through the document, my comments range from, very high level to typos. And that can be taken out easily. And, the high level comments, as Jeff points out, are the most relevant here. And the typos are very particular comments I have about some of the explanations of things are not appropriate for this meeting. So I would like to be able to share those with whoever is preparing the document.
oh, certainly, that would be great. We would appreciate it. You can send those to me directly.
To you.
Mhm.
Okay, so okay, Chet, you look as if you're about to say something.
Yeah, there's one item of old business that we must take care of, and that is the minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any comments about those minutes? I have one that I think there's an error. It suggests that Nan were elected to be, it says co-chair of the committee, but in fact, what she was put up for was to be the vice chair of the committee. That change should be made in the minutes.
Okay, will do.
I had one correction, which is Dana Breen is listed as a member of town staff, which is inaccurate. I believe was present, but just as a member of the public.
Thank you. Can I just ask one question about the draft update? In the first section, faulting existing conditions, there's a term called entitlement permitting. I didn't know what that meant.
Laura, can you answer that one?
Where are you, Pat, in the document?
So it was the very beginning, that faulting existing conditions. There was a statement about entitlement permitting. So I didn't know what that meant. Let's see if I can find it more precisely.
Entitlement usually means the planning approval for a project. So when it goes before ASCC or Planning Commission, that's usually what an entitlement means, but maybe we just need to change that language there.
Okay, thank you.
Page 5.
I'm sorry if I may, that brings up one other question I had. And that is that the timing of the review of the geotechnical reports. Some are required as design level reports, so just as the basically the approval's been given, as I understand, and building's about to begin, and ground's about to be cleared. But I would like to see more preliminary reports required, and this document would be the appropriate place to discuss that, I think. At the beginning, it's basically the beginning of a building or development process, whether it's for a single house or a multifamily structure. In my view, the safety really starts from the ground up. You have to consider what's under the ground, what's on the ground, all the conditions of the ground first, and get that absolutely straight before you even start to think about where you're going to put buildings. And as people have pointed out, the maps are approximations of where we think the faults are. We don't know all of the conditions under the ground. And if there's anything that's even suspected, could be suspected of being a problem under a building site, I think that should be taken care of at an earlier stage in the development application process. So it's a question of, I guess, preliminary reports versus design level. I'm not sure how that would be implemented.
Through the chair, did you want us to talk about this a little bit or just reflect this into our, into the comments?
Just, I think, let them be part of the record, I think.
Okay, there are lots of projects where there is a preliminary investigation and then a design level investigation. So,
And if that is on a case-by-case basis for a particular site?
it depends on the nature of the project.
The Geologic Safety Committee is in a difficult position here because we were told not to study the Stanford Wedge, for example, which was mentioned on page 9 in the draft report. So I've been told not to study something that really ought to be studied, and we have expertise that could do so. We're trying to do so as private citizens. And that's the only way we can conduct business if the town won't let us conduct business as a committee. Are there any further comments? Laura, I think maybe the meeting can be adjourned. Do you agree?
Do we need to approve the minutes as changed?
Well, we talked about.
You should have a motion and a second to approve the minutes, and you should provide the public an opportunity to provide any comments on the minutes.
So moved.
Okay, there is a hand up, so we should see if that is a comment related to the minutes.
Yes.
So I'll let Christy Corley speak.
She wants to comment on the minutes.
Are there any further comments on the minutes? We've already talked about changes that are needed.
Christy has a comment.
Christy?
I would like any changes that are made be put in red and dated for the public in the future, coming out of any changes on the brand new, what you call brand new policies. So I would like this committee to vote on this fact that we would like to know a list of the landslides and earthquakes in town and where they occurred. And we would like to know the brand new policies related to geo with dates and be put in the digest after the town council has updated anything. Thank you.
This will be noted in the minutes for this meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so you have a motion and a second on the minutes, so you should just vote on the minutes and then you can adjourn.
Okay. I vote in favor.
I'm in favor.
Yeah.
I'm in favor.
Okay, so,
Motion just passed.
okay, so minutes are approved. Thank you.
Thank you, and please note the time. Thank you. Thank you for the meeting.
You know.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.